It's chapter 1, verses 7 through 17 and 20 through 23. And it's found on page 1744 in the Pew Bible if you want to follow along. This is the opening of the letter, and Paul is hoping to encourage the hearts of the folks who are in this church, the persecuted church in Rome. And he writes, "To all in Rome who are loved by God and called to be his holy people, grace and peace to you from God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. God, whom I serve in my spirit in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness, how constantly I remember you in my prayers at all times. And I pray that now at last, by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you. I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I have had among the other Gentiles. I am obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I am so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. For in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith." Continuing on with verse 20. "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood by what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles." May God add his blessing to the reading of his word this morning. Amen. Well, every June 21st, 20,000 people gather in England to watch the sunrise. Now, this is no ordinary day, and the place that they gather is no ordinary place. They watch with anticipation, and then they shout and whistle and clap as the first rays of the dawn shine through the great stone circle in the perfect trajectory, touching the heel stone at Stonehenge on the summer solstice. The first day of summer, the longest summer day of the year. And in the crowd are members of the secular order of Druids, New Age adherents, neo-pagan spiritualists, and the largest number by far are the all-night revelers who are just along for the party. You can go into YouTube and you can see this if you want to. So in May of 2010, I was able to stand there where the 20,000 strong party would be there in a few weeks. And I marveled over this massive and enigmatic stone circle that dates back to 3,000 years before the birth of Jesus. At that time, according to archaeologists, the area around what is now Stonehenge was formed into a massive earthwork with a bank and a ditch configuration called a henge, that's why it's Stonehenge, and it was dug with tools that were made from deer antlers. If you've ever seen this, you'll realize what a feat that must have been. And about 2000 BC, the first stones, were the inner circle of the circle, were set up, and it consisted of 80 blue stones that were quarried in the Presley Mountains, some 240 miles away in Wales. Now think about this. This is 2000 BC. They didn't have any trucks in those days to transport this stuff. So think about the engineering feat of transporting each stone that weighed over 4 tons from Wales to the Salisbury Plain on the River Avon. They had to be transported by rafts along the coast, then up the river, and then hauled overland, probably using a system of log rollers, to the site where they sit on this great rise of the Salisbury Plain. How many of you have seen Stonehenge? So some of you have. And most of you have seen pictures of it anyway. So I think about the great cost of human energy and determination to haul these stones from so vast a distance. And it brings me to a question. Why? Why would the people who built the monument do it? After all, the stones around them were big enough that, they could have used stones from that area. There must have been something special about these stones. And indeed, some scholars have proposed that these blue stones from that part of Wales, going back to pre-Christian times, were felt to be sacred. And they were invested with healing powers along with their enchanting beauty. Because when they're polished, these stones have a celestial blue color, and it's magnified along with the embedded quartz crystals that sparkle like stars in the night sky. So perhaps that was reason enough to secure the stones at such a great cost. But the stones aren't very large. I mean, it's kind of, you're nonplussed when you see them. And unless you've been there when it rained, you're probably not going to see how pretty and colorful they are. And they're not the great towering monoliths that we think of when we envision Stonehenge. Those were added later on, about 1500 BC, they think. These great, what they call sarsen stones, came from the North Marlborough Downs, so that's only about 20 miles away. But at least 600 men would have been needed to get those stones to the site where they're mounted to stand upright in the perfect circle formation. And then after that, they added lintels that went all the way around the top. If you see today, you only see some that have lintels, but imagine people having to lift, I suppose with levers and pulleys, stones that weighed tons up that high on top of these others to make the circle. It would seem that these primitive builders had sophisticated knowledge not only of engineering and stone cutting, but of astronomy, as their building is a kind of astronomical observatory that still functions well 5,000 years later, as 20,000 people observe every year. I still don't have a satisfactory answer to the question, but maybe there's more than one answer. Maybe the builder's intention was to create a sacred space, not just for healing, but for practical purposes, having to do with the natural rhythm of their lives, the seasons and months and days of the year. A place where the goodness of life could be celebrated in recognition of the great power that was beyond what they could create. But if you stand in Stonehenge and you look around you, you'll see these large mounds of earth in the flat open pasture land. They're barrows, or burial chambers, and they contain thousands of skeletons. So maybe Stonehenge was not just a place of sacred healing and worship and keeping time. Maybe it was also a great mausoleum, a place where death was integrated, maybe even celebrated, as part of this ongoing life cycle that the community connected to this great power beyond them. That makes sense to me. But our guide told us that we needed to imagine ourselves as part of that community. I have a hard time imagining myself living in 1500 BC in some primitive tribe. But she said, think about that. They lived on this riverbank of Avon in the town of what's now the town of Amesbury. And this great plain of Salisbury sweeps up from the river with a flat pasture land in the west. And there would have been a grassy road that went up the mountain, it's kind of a little gentle mountain, up towards the stones from the town. And this looming circle was made all the more impressive because of the bulk and height of it. I mean, it kind of loomed above the town. It was exaggerated in size. And they think that there were regular processions for worship that probably went up that road, and it was a sort of a place of pilgrimage. Perhaps they brought their sick up there and put them in the circle next to the blue stones, hoping that they would be healed. And perhaps there were other times when they carried their dead to the circle to have some kind of a ritual of parting and releasing them to the next world. Now, the other logical question that floats to your mind's surface as you wander around the circle is who? Who built it? Well, back in a couple of 300 years ago, there was an English historian, John Aubrey, who advanced the theory that it was built by Druids. They were an ancient Celtic priesthood, and they existed from before the Roman conquest, which was started in 55 BC. But even at that date, the stones had been there by 2,000 years. And I mean, who knew whether they had Druids back then? Nobody knows that. So the best guess is that there was some people in this Neolithic period, around 3000 BC, who were indigenous, they lived in a community, and they worked with tools. That's about all we can say. So the truth is we don't know. We don't know who built Stonehenge, we don't know why. And this great enigma was produced by a culture that left no written records. So Stonehenge makes us wonder and begs us to make meaning of it all. And it's truly a message that has no meaning. But you know, this doesn't stop a lot of people from making their own meanings and their own uses of Stonehenge. Modern day Druids claim it as a sacred site, unique to them, and they have a legal right to gather there at least 4 times a year for solstices and equinoxes, and they have some kind of worship service there. I don't know what it is, but they're worshiping the creation. They don't worship the Creator. And they've co-opted Stonehenge for purposes that may be so far removed from the intention of the builders. And I wonder if this is all the original designers were up to. Because they lived in a time before God, as we know God. God revealed himself personally to our ancestors of faith in about 2100 BC. He came to Abraham. So they were there before that. Probably about 900 years. But even before God personally chose to commune with Abraham in what theologians call personal revelation, God amply revealed himself to anyone on earth in what is called general revelation. And the Psalms, even though they were written down much longer, they give us evidence that this was a long-standing belief among people of faith. Psalm 19 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. And day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge." So certainly when you think of the marvel of Stonehenge, the builders must have had some knowledge of that to conceive and achieve its construction. The monument, even from the sketchy conclusions of the archaeological record, seems to have more significance than merely being a gigantic sundial. Psalm 8 says, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have set in place, what is man that you're mindful of him? You made him ruler over the works of your hands. You put everything under his feet, all the flocks and herds and the beasts of the field. Did the Stonehenge people understand that? That God was mindful of them? That in the goodness and provision and regularity of springtime and planting and summertime growing and autumn harvest and winter rest, God was lovingly caring for his people who were his treasured creation. And God was there personally to bring healing when they needed it and to receive them into his celestial home when they could not be made whole on earth. Now, I like that explanation, as well as those of the archaeologists. After all, the God who was with Abraham was the same God who spoke to Adam, and the same God who inspired these original builders of Stonehenge. There's only one God. But we can't know for sure whether they knew him. And why? Because the zealous builders of Stonehenge, what for them was surely intended to be an eternal building, and for all intents and purposes it is, they left no clear guidance for successive generations to understand. Somewhere along the line they failed to transmit the meaning of their message. The stones stood silent for millennia. So within an hour after leaving Stonehenge, I'm deposited and standing in awe in front of another great pile of stones, skillfully put together in the edifice of Salisbury Cathedral. A magnificent cathedral. If you've ever read Pillars of the Earth, the Ken Follett series, it's about the building of that cathedral. It was built in the 1200s. Its spire soars over 400 feet high. It's the tallest spire in Britain. It was built in only 38 years, which is, amazing, a marvel of its time. But today, how many years did it take to build the Washington Cathedral? Does anybody know? It's probably like 50 years or something. They built this in 38 years. It's magnificent. The chapter house contains one of only 4 existing copies of Magna Carta. The cathedral's clock, that dates from 1386, is the oldest working modern clock in the world. The cloisters are the largest in England. The treasures that you see when you visit Salisbury Cathedral are breathtaking, treasures of history, but not necessarily of God's glory. Because indeed the docent who showed us around did not mention God once. And I wondered as I took in the majesty of that place, if the meaning of its message is not just being obscured, but like Stonehenge may soon be lost. And when I turned to Romans, this wonderful letter from the Apostle Paul, I thought about these things. This is a treasure that hasn't been lost. It's the ardent words, I hope I was expressing that to you, of Paul to these people in Rome whom he's never met, but because of his faithfulness to Christ, they came to Christ across the miles. These were the saints, the faithful Christians who lived under the threat of death every day of their lives in the city of Rome. The ones that he loved and whom God loved. And their faith was being reported all over the world. Did you hear that? All over the world they knew of the great faith of this church. And the meaning of their message was carried far and wide because they were not ashamed of the gospel. Even though their mere admission to being a follower of Christ could have executed them. And they weren't ashamed of the gospel. They were unafraid. They had in them the power of God that let them really live out their faith. And all salvation was theirs from sin, from the fear of Rome's oppression, from persecution, from crucifixion. It was lived out every day in their faith in the gospel. They weren't just waiting around to be changed in some afterlife. They knew that each day they lived now in the righteousness of God, with Him at the center of their living, gave their lives the shape of faith, of living faith that gave evidence to others, and they caught the faith. It was something they could see. It was tangible. It wasn't just their actions, it was them. It's how they treated one another and those outside. People saw they were different. They were not only unafraid, but they gave evidence of their gifts of the Spirit. They were joyful. They were peaceful. They were patient. They were kind. They were good. They were faithful. They were gentle. They controlled themselves. And they loved. And I think about us here today. Every single one of us is here because someone we knew was not ashamed of the gospel. Now think about that. Someone, a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor, a friend, a Sunday school teacher, a pastor, an acquaintance. Someone shared their love of Jesus Christ with you. And that's why you're here. That's why we continue on. Because faith needs to be alive. It needs to be given from one generation to the next. It needs to be dynamic. It needs to be driven by the movement and the life of the Holy Spirit in you. And you have to have this vibrant, real, committed relationship with Jesus. It's not enough just to be here, to just sit here in the pews on Sunday mornings because someone else passed their tradition on to you. The reason you're here is not to continue history or tradition or even to be in fellowship with other people. You're here to commune with the Holy God. and to be with him, to hear his word whispered in your ear, to be lifted bodily and spiritually by the music, the singing, the praying, the proclaiming, and the owning of God's urgent presence right now, and to be encouraged and not be ashamed of the gospel. You know, there's a movie that was out a few years ago called Pay It Forward. Anybody see that? It was a sweet little movie. It was about a little boy, 11 years old, who was given an assignment from social studies to create and put into action a plan that was going to change the world. Not much for an 11-year-old to do. Well, this little boy decided to begin a program based on multiplying good deeds. And he began to do favors for people and asked them not to repay him for the kindness, but to pay it forward to somebody else. And then more and more people were blessed. You know, that's what you accepted when you called Jesus your Lord. He wants you to pay it forward. He wants you to encourage somebody else to know him, to love him, and follow him. But you can only know that if you know him. Do you know the Lord? How many of you know Jesus? I mean, you won't put up your hands, I'm sure. How many of you really know him personally and you've given your life to him? Every single bit of it. You haven't held a piece back. How many have a real relationship with him? Because if you do, you're going to have that vibrant faith. You're going to know what he said to you. You're going to read his word. You're going to pray to him. You're going to commune with him. Praying is just talking to him. You're going to have a faith that's alive. Because God will speak to you, and you will hear and understand. God will speak to you, and you will know. You will know what he says, and you will come to know him more deeply. That's what we hope to do on Saturday, right, Wendy? There's 33 people coming to this retreat. I want each and every one of you to come with the expectation that you're going to know God more deeply. And having a relationship with him is like any other relationship. If you only brush it up and take it out once a week, it's going to be a weak relationship. W-E-A-K. You have to work at it. You have to be together with God every day. And then you need to share that relationship with other people. That's the call of the gospel. As I stand here in this meeting house, I remember the vision of Stonehenge. I remember Salisbury Cathedral. We are in a place that could become like them because we're rich in history. I'm not ashamed of our history, don't get me wrong. It's a history that's significant far beyond ourselves as individuals. The fabric of our nation began to be woven right here. Think about that. Society formed from the seeds planted here. Laws were written. Government was designed. Community life was prescribed. But the great heritage of this place is not its history. It's the faithful presence of God with his people for 400 years. If we're not careful, we're going to lose it. It's already being lost. It's wrestling can tell you. Read the history of the Pilgrims that they teach in school now, and you'll see what I mean. Talk about revisionist history. God's not part of it. Next year, there's going to be a big celebration here in Plymouth, put on by the town. 400 years of great history. God's not going to be on it. Breaks my heart. We have a chance to honor God. Kathy and I are going to be meeting with Nancy Martin from the Jennings Museum, and we're going to find out exactly how we can be part of celebrating God's history of 400 years in Plymouth. And I'll let you know later. Kathy and I will have marching orders for us for the 400. But it's exciting to know that we can be part of that. So I ask you, why are you here today? What's the meaning of the message for you? Are you here because your family always came? It's good enough? It's expected of you to be here, so you're here. Are you here because it's really neat to be part of an American history worshiping church that's part of American history, the quaint New England church that the Pilgrim ancestors built? Are you here today because you're among friends and it's wonderful just to be in community? You know, these aren't bad reasons. They're just not the right reasons. Don't be ashamed of the gospel. Hear it, learn it, love it, share it. Because it's the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. That's the meaning of our message. Let's pray. Gracious God, the heavens do declare your glory. The very sky proclaims the work of your hands, and the gentle wind off the water, and the joyful singing as the birds greet the first rays of dawn, and the looming majesty of white clouds shaded gray just before a thunderstorm. In the day, skies speak, and in the night they display knowledge of you like a book open to a map of the stars. The full moonlight falls to earth, seeming to light the atmosphere in minute torches of fireflies. And yet most evenings we don't even notice. And even in these creations, though there's no speech or language, your voice goes out to all the earth and your words to the ends of the world. Though they are mute, the wisdom of your ordinances is surely given in the perfect timing of days and months and years. Springtime, summer, autumn, and winter. Earth dancing around the sun in the certain rhythm that ordains our lives. If this was all you had left for us, gracious God, it would be evidence enough that you are mighty and that you love us. But your words are not spoken only through the heavens. You spoke in your scriptures, you made your word flesh in your Son Jesus. And it's through these that you speak to us in a uniquely personal message. You sent your Son into the world to give us the gospel, the good news that sin no longer must overshadow us. Sin need no longer separate us from you and each other. You sent Jesus because you so loved the world that you would not have us die in our sins. You long for us to live once more with you in the shelter of your love. You spoke clearly the words of life to us. Christ has come, Christ has died, Christ has risen, and Christ will come again. And you ask that our voices declare this great good news, not just here, where it's safe for us to do so, but in every place that you put us, and not merely with our lips, but more powerfully with our lives. Along with everything else you've given us, gracious God, give us the boldness and the longing to share what Jesus has done for us, in us, and with us. In his glorious name, amen.